For 7 years, I paid my parents' rent, covered their car insurance, sent money for groceries, and wired cash every time my dad texted me that something came up. I never once asked them to pay me back. I told myself that's what family does. I was wrong. I found out the truth on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, eating a sad desk salad I'd brought from home because I was trying to save money. Ironic, right? I was eating a $4 lunch to cut expenses while simultaneously sending my parents $600 a month. My aunt called me out of nowhere. We weren't super close. She's my mom's old sister, lives up in Vermont, the kind of woman who sends real birthday cards with stamps on them. She said she'd been sitting on something for weeks and couldn't hold it anymore. "Sweetheart," she said, "your parents just updated their will. Everything goes to your brother. I thought you should know." I sat there in my car with my fork halfway to my mouth. "Everything. Everything," she said. "The house, the savings accounts, the investments, all of it." To Declan. I put my fork down. I asked her if she was sure. She said she'd seen the documents herself. My mom had shown them to her over Christmas, apparently proud of the decision as if it were perfectly reasonable. She'd told my aunt that Declan needed the security because he had a wife and kids to think about. I had no husband, no kids. So apparently I needed nothing. What my parents didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask about in 7 years, was that I was the reason they had a house at all. Let me back up. My name is Waverly. I'm 31 years old. I work in commercial real estate finance, which sounds more impressive than it is, but it does mean I understand how money and property work. I've understood it since I was in my early 20s, which is how I ended up in the situation I'm about to describe. My parents have never been great with money. My dad worked in logistics his whole life, decent salary but never saved much. My mom did bookkeeping part-time when we were kids, then stopped working entirely when my younger brother Declan was born. He has some learning differences and she wanted to be home with him. That's a choice I respected. What I didn't respect was what came later. When I was 23, fresh out of college with my first real job in Atlanta, my parents called me with a problem. They were renting a house in Asheville, North Carolina, where they'd moved after my dad's company transferred him. The landlord was selling the property and giving them 60 days to vacate. They were panicked. They'd been there 6 years. They loved the neighborhood. My mom had her garden and her neighbors and the routine that kept her grounded. Moving felt catastrophic to them. I drove up that weekend and sat at their kitchen table going through their finances with them. The numbers were not good. They had almost nothing saved. My dad had been putting money into a whole life insurance policy for years thinking it was an investment. It wasn't. And my mom had made some purchases on store credit cards that had ballooned. They could not qualify for a mortgage on their own. But I could. I was 23, I had a good job, I had almost no debt, and my credit score was already solid because I'd been careful since the day I got my first credit card. I talked to a mortgage broker friend of mine. I ran the numbers 3 different ways. And then I made a decision I thought was generous but smart. I would buy the house. My name on the deed, my name on the mortgage, my credit, my liability. My parents would live there and pay me rent each month to cover the mortgage payment, plus a little extra that would go into a property reserve account. The house was $278,000. My mortgage payment was $1,604 a month. My parents agreed to pay me $800 a month, covering the mortgage and putting $160 aside for repairs and property taxes. Simple, clean, fair. That lasted about 4 months. By spring of that year, my dad started having what he called cash flow problems. His hours had been cut. My mom needed dental work. The car needed new tires. Could I just cover the mortgage this month, and they'd pay me back next month? I said yes. Once I told myself, just this once. You already know how this story goes. By the time I turned 24, I had quietly absorbed the full mortgage payment. My parents were paying me $400 a month. Sometimes, and calling it their contribution. I was covering the remaining $1,240 plus property taxes, plus the HOA fee I hadn't known about when I bought it, plus occasional repairs when things broke. I'd also started sending extra money on top of that when they asked. A few hundred here, birthday money for Declan, holiday money for groceries, my dad's truck registration when he said he couldn't swing it. I kept a spreadsheet. I'm that kind of person. By the end of year 2, I had spent just over $40,000 of my own money on a house I didn't live in, for parents who had stopped saying thank you somewhere around month 7. I want to be honest about something. I didn't say anything, not really. I complained to my college roommate on the phone. I cried in my apartment once after a particularly frustrating call with my mom where she mentioned, in passing, like it was nothing, that they were thinking of repainting the living room and could I send a little extra to cover the paint and supplies. I cried and then I sent the money. Why? Because my mom had a way of making me feel like I was the problem. Like being upset about money made me cold, selfish, ungrateful for my own good fortune. Not everyone is as lucky as you, she'd say. I'd gotten scholarships, landed a good job, lived in a nice apartment. According to her, this made me lucky, not hardworking, and luck was something you were supposed to share. And Declan. I told myself I was doing it partly for Declan too. He'd had a rough time of it growing up. He struggled in school, took longer to find himself, and my parents had poured everything they had into supporting him, which was part of why they had nothing left. I didn't resent him for it. At least, I didn't think I did. What I didn't realize until much later was that Declan, now 26, had developed a very comfortable relationship with entitlement. He'd watched my parents depend on me for years. He knew the house was in my name because my mom had told him, and his response, apparently, was to start researching how he might access it. I didn't know any of that yet. I knew things were off when my dad called me in January, about 2 months before my aunt's phone call, with a strange energy I couldn't quite place. He asked how work was going, how Atlanta was, whether I was seeing anyone seriously. Small talk but pointed. Then he said casually, "We've been thinking about the house, about what happens to it long term." I said, "Dad, it's in my name, it's my house." There was a pause. "Well, it's complicated," he said. "We've been here all these years, we've put a lot of love into this place. I've put a lot of money into this place," I said, and I could hear how sharp my voice got. He backtracked immediately, said he didn't mean anything by it, changed the subject. But I felt something cold settle in my chest. I started paying closer attention. "I have a college friend named Tobias." Wait, that name is in the file. Let me say, I have a friend from my college years who works as a title attorney. I texted him after that call with my dad and asked if someone could claim any kind of rights to a property just by living there long term. He said it depended on the state and the circumstances. But in North Carolina, adverse possession generally requires a claim of ownership without the owner's permission over many years. It wouldn't apply here since my parents knew the house was mine. But he told me something else worth noting. Anyone could try to take out a loan using a property as collateral if they had enough documentation and a willing lender, and a fraudulent mortgage application was harder to catch than people thought. I filed that away. Then came my aunt's call in March, everything to Declan, nothing to me. I sat in my parking garage for a long time after we hung up. I ate my salad, I thought about the spreadsheet. By that point, 7 years in, I'd spent somewhere in the range of $112,000 on that house. Between the mortgage coverage, the repairs, the extra cash, the taxes. My parents' house, my parents' life, their garden, their neighbors, their routine, and they'd given it all, at least in their minds, to my brother. I didn't call them that night. I needed to think first, not react. What I knew, the house was mine, legally and completely. My name was the only name on the deed. There was no co-ownership, no lien they could claim, no legal standing whatsoever. Whatever they wrote in their will about the house, it meant nothing. You can't will away something you don't own. What I didn't know yet was how far things had already gone. 2 weeks after my aunt's call, I got an alert from a financial monitoring service I'd signed up for years ago. One that flags when a property tied to your name or social security number appears in a credit inquiry or public record filing. I'd set it up when I first bought the house, out of habit, and then sort of forgotten about it. The alert said there had been a lender inquiry associated with the Asheville property. I stared at my phone for a full minute before I understood what I was reading. I called my title attorney friend from college. I'll just call him my friend, the attorney, and read him the alert details. He pulled up the public records and went quiet for a moment. "Waverly," he said slowly. "Someone has submitted a mortgage application listing this property as collateral. Can they do that? Not legally. Not without your consent and signature, but they can try. And if they find a predatory lender, or someone who doesn't do proper due diligence on the title, it can create a serious mess even if it doesn't go through." I asked him who had submitted it. He said the application was in my brother's name. Declan had been trying to take out a $90,000 home equity loan on a house he didn't own, using it as collateral. He'd listed himself as a co-owner in the application, which was a lie, and had apparently used some of the old paperwork from when I first bought the house, documents he'd gotten from my parents, to try to make it look credible. I'm going to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even surprise, really. It was something quieter and colder than either of those things. It was clarity. I called my attorney friend back and asked him exactly what I needed to do. He walked me through it step by step. I had a right to file a fraud alert with the lender. I had a right to send a cease and desist. Most importantly, I had every legal right to take back full control of my property at any time. My parents' rental arrangement with me had never been formalized. No written lease, no legal tenancy agreement. That actually worked in my favor. I spent that next week talking to a real estate attorney in North Carolina, a woman with an office in downtown Asheville who was recommended to me by 3 different people in my industry. She was methodical and calm, and she did not waste my time with pleasantries. She confirmed everything my friend had told me. She also told me something I hadn't fully considered, that depending on how things played out, I might have grounds to report the fraudulent mortgage application to law enforcement, which could have very serious consequences for my brother. I told her I'd keep that option in my pocket for now. I sent a formal letter, drafted by my attorney, sent certified mail, to my parents, notifying them that as the legal owner of the property, I was exercising my right to transition the property to a formal lease arrangement, and that I required their written response within 30 days. The letter outlined that the property had been owned exclusively by me since purchase, that no co-ownership claims existed, and that any claims made to lenders or third parties suggesting otherwise could expose the claimant to legal liability. The response I got was not a written one. My mom called me screaming. She said I had betrayed the family. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to them. She said, "And this is the part I will never forget. Everything we've given you, and this is how you repay us." I had my phone on speaker and I was sitting at my kitchen counter taking notes with a pen, because my attorney had told me to document every conversation. I kept writing. The pen scratched across the paper while my mom's voice got louder. When she finally stopped, I said, "Mom, I want to ask you something. Do you know what Declan has been trying to do with my house?" Silence. "He submitted a mortgage application," I said, listing it as collateral. "He listed himself as a co-owner, which isn't mortgage fraud." More silence. Then, quietly, my dad's voice in the background. Then my mom again, her tone different now. "He was just trying to secure his future. You have your career. He has a family." "He has a family," I said. "And I own the house you live in. I need you to think carefully about what happens next." My dad got on the phone. He said they weren't going anywhere. He said I could send all the letters I wanted, but they'd been there 7 years and I was his daughter, and I had a responsibility to this family. I said, "Dad, you have 30 days. I hung up. I want to pause here and say something, because I know how this sounds. I know there are people who will say I went too far, that they're my parents, that family is family. I heard versions of that from my dad's cousin when word got around, and from a girl I went to high school with who commented on something I posted. Here's what I know. I spent 7 years subsidizing a life for 2 people who at the end of those 7 years had decided in writing that I deserved nothing, not even a conversation about it. Not even acknowledgement of what I'd given. My mom didn't call me when they updated the will. My dad didn't sit me down and explain their reasoning. They just did it quietly and assumed I'd keep sending money. Meanwhile, my brother had attempted to commit fraud against me, not a stranger, not a bank, his sister. I kept the 30 days. I was patient, I didn't escalate. They did. 2 weeks after my letter arrived, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Turns out it was a local attorney my parents had consulted. He was not impressive. He talked around the edges of things, using language designed to sound threatening without actually saying anything specific. He implied my parents might have a claim based on long-term occupancy and financial contribution. I let him finish. Then I said, "Are you familiar with how adverse possession works in North Carolina?" He was, I said. "Then you know that doesn't apply here. And I'd like you to confirm that your client's son submitted a fraudulent mortgage application naming this property as collateral, because I have the documentation and I've been advised that filing a report with the North Carolina Attorney General's office is an option available to me." He said he'd have to get back to me. He didn't call back. On day 31, after the deadline had passed with no written response and no lease agreement signed, my attorney filed the formal eviction notice. It was delivered by a process server on a Wednesday morning. Both my parents were named. My mother called me 9 times that day. I let it go to voicemail. My father sent a text that said, "I hope you're happy." I wasn't happy. I want to be clear about that. There was nothing joyful about any of this. I cried more in those weeks than I had in years. Not because I doubted myself, but because grief is real even when you're right. I grieved the parents I'd wanted them to be. I grieved the 7 years. I grieved the version of this story where they had just said thank you, where they had just asked me, where things could have been different. They vacated in 6 weeks. My dad's younger brother helped them move. My brother apparently found them a rental in the same town. The irony of needing to rent again after everything, and according to my aunt, my mom cried every day for 2 weeks. I heard all of this secondhand. I did not call. Once the house was vacant and professionally cleaned, I had it inspected. There was some deferred maintenance, a water heater that was aging out, a bathroom tile situation, some landscaping that had been let go. I put about $14,000 into it over 2 months. My contractor did good work, then I listed it. The Asheville market had been strong for years. Remote work had driven up demand for exactly the kind of property I had: 3-bedroom, quiet neighborhood, good schools nearby, an actual yard with my mom's old garden beds, which I'd had cleaned up and replanted with simple native plants that looked intentional and beautiful. The house sold in 11 days. I had 3 offers. The final sale price was $479. I had paid $278,000 for it 7 years ago. After the mortgage payoff, closing costs, and the repairs I'd put in, I walked away with just over $180,000. I sat with that number for a while. My attorney called to congratulate me and I thanked her and sat at my kitchen table in Atlanta for a long time after we hung up. I thought about the spreadsheet. The $112,000 I'd sent into that house over 7 years. The $4 salad in the parking garage. My mom saying everything we've given you while I took notes on a legal pad. I thought about Declan, who had a wife and kids and apparently needed security, and who had tried to take $90,000 from me through fraud. My attorney had advised me that the lender had ultimately rejected his application when the title search revealed the truth, and that the matter was documented but no charges had been filed. I decided to leave it that way. Not because I forgave him, I'm honestly not there yet, but because I was done spending my energy on any of it. I put $50,000 of the proceeds into a high-yield account designated for my own future home purchase. I paid off the last of my student loans, which weren't much but felt good to eliminate. I invested the rest. My aunt called me a few weeks after the sale closed. She'd heard through my mom. She asked how I was doing, really doing, and I told her the truth. I was okay, tired, a little hollowed out in a way that was starting to fill back in. She said, "Your mom is telling everyone you stole the house from her." I said, "She can say that." My aunt laughed, just a small laugh. "I know, honey, I know. I haven't spoken to my parents since the day I told my dad he had 30 days. My brother sent me a text once about 6 weeks after everything was over that said, 'I hope you know what you destroyed.' I read it twice and then archived it without responding. What I destroyed, as if I had been the architect of any of this. I'm not writing this because I want sympathy. I'm writing this because for 7 years I was the person in my family who kept everything running and got nothing in return. Not acknowledgement, not respect, not even a conversation, and when I finally stopped, I was the villain. Here is what I know now that I didn't know at 23. Being generous doesn't protect you. Being reliable doesn't protect you. Being the responsible one doesn't protect you. The people who take from you don't keep score the same way you do. They reframe what they take as what they deserve, and they reframe what you gave as what you owed. The only thing that protected me, in the end, was my name on the deed. I think about that a lot. The version of me who was 23s and sat at that kitchen table running numbers didn't know she was protecting herself. She thought she was helping her family. Maybe both things were true at once, I don't know. What I know is this: my name was on the deed, my money was in the account. My credit score had built something real, and when the moment came I had options. I used them. The $180,000 is sitting in accounts I own, in my name, earning interest. My credit score is fine. My apartment in Atlanta has good light in the mornings, and I make my coffee and I sit by the window and I think, I am 31 years old and I owe nothing to anyone. That's not a sad ending. I know it might sound like one. but I promise you it isn't.